Today's lesson is, I know, kind of an interesting title. It's something that just like popped into my brain. Maybe it's from the Lord, maybe because I was just having had bad pizza or something. Every wife's battle with the dirty dozen lies. Because it's like those evil lies, the dirty dozen that the enemy launches so commonly against wives. Now, some of you in this room, some of you listening on YouTube are not a wife. But you might be a wife someday. And if you're thinking that you might be a wife someday, this would also apply to you, because here's what I know. The reason I put this together is because in the last probably 2 months, I have talked to women who have encountered every one of these lies and had a major problem because they fell for one of these lies. And so I don't want this to happen to you. Do not let this happen to you. It does not end well. Yes, God can patch things back together again, but how about if we just don't fall into the trap? Could we just get on board with that? Let's not fall into the enemy's devilish schemes. Let's avoid falling into that, right? There is an invisible war going on around us. Do you know that? There is this invisible war going on around us. And that's why this is so insidious. Because the devil is working behind the scenes in the invisible realm, launching these schemes. And if you are not super duper aware, you'll fall into his trap, because it's an invisible war. Ephesians 6, starting at verse 11. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Therefore, do nothing. No, that's not what it says. No, that's not what it says. It doesn't say bury your head in the sand. It does not say that. It says, therefore, put on the full armor of God, so that when the day of evil comes, and it will, you may be able to stand your ground, and after you've done everything, to stand. Do you not want your marriage to stand? Mm-hmm. Your future marriage, if you're not married now, but you hope to be someday, do you not want it to last? Do you not want it to stand? That we have to be aware of the common schemes of the enemy. And they're so subtle. They're so insidious in their subtlety. But we're going to drag it out into the light tonight, so that his schemes are not lurking in the darkness, but they've been exposed to the light. So here are 12 common lies, the dirty dozen. 12 common lies the devil tells wives to try to destroy their marriage. And they're not in any particular order. But here's the first one. He lies to us about our worth and value. So we allow men, maybe a husband, to treat us disrespectfully. The devil has a master's degree in lying. It is his specialty. Speaking of the devil, in John 8:44, Jesus says, there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks his native language, for he is a liar and the father of lies. So this is what he's up to. This is what he's doing. And for some of you, he has been speaking to you saying, yeah, you're just lucky you even have a husband. You can't expect him to treat you well. If he treats you abusively, well, this is the best you can do anyway, and you really can't rock the boat, because if you do rock the boat and say anything, then he might leave you, and then you'll just crumble because no one really wants you, and you're just not worth anything, and blah, 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 right? And some of you have bought those lies, that you're not worth anything, that there's no value for you, that you're not lovable, that you're not worth it. And that is a big, fat, stinking, rotten, smelly, moldy lie. Amen?
Amen.
I'm just calling him out in all his schemes. Okay, second lie. He lies by prompting us to make negative assumptions about our husbands. Oh, he's so good at this one too. Negative assumptions. Do you know Satan has been prompting women to draw wrong conclusions since the Garden of Eden? He started this very early on in his lying career and his despicable career. Genesis 3, starting at verse 1, Satan was whispering into Eve's ear, and he said, did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden? And then he whispered another lie. You will not surely die, for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. All this was a wrong conclusion. This was a wrong conclusion. In your marriage, Satan may help you to jump to wrong conclusions about your husband. For instance, maybe he does something minor but kind of offends you, like he forgets to get a Valentine's card or something, right? He just forgot, right? But, Satan's busy whispering into your ear, well, that's because he doesn't even love you. So he's helping you to jump to wrong conclusions. In marriage, he'll often get you to accuse your husband of something without even knowing the facts first. Has anyone ever jumped into that thing, right? Have you already jumped to the conclusion and already accused your husband in your mind before you've actually asked him to explain the situation to you? Do you ever make sweeping judgments about his motives, about his heart? Have you said, well, he did that on purpose because he knows that makes me mad? Or, one of those kind of things where you're just jumping to conclusions. This is all aided and abetted by the enemy, helping you to jump to negative conclusions, negative assumptions about your husband. I know he did that in my marriage to Raul. I mean, he would do something that was slightly annoying, and I'd have this little whisperer in my ear going well, that's because he doesn't even love you. He did that because he knows that aggravates you. But he's like, wait a minute, that's not even true. But that whisperer, right, just trying to get you to jump to negative conclusions. And you know what we do when he's whispering in our ear, do you not?
Yes.
When he's sitting on your shoulder, whispering in your ear, you go, bam, off my shoulder. I'm not listening to this garbage anymore. I almost said another word, but I said garbage, so there you go. Okay. Third point. He lies by prompting us to believe in beautiful delusions. This is where I want to park for a while because this is where so many women fall into his snare. First of all, let me back this up biblically. 2 Corinthians 11:14 says Satan masquerades as an angel of light. Get the picture? He masquerades. He likes to create beautiful delusions. And I want to talk about 3 common delusions and the snares that he sets out for women in terms of delusions. One that is very common. He will deceive you into thinking that a coworker or your neighbor or your pastor is really your soulmate. In other words, he'll prompt you to believe that the grass is greener on the other side and you missed the boat with this guy that you're with, so recycle that guy and welcome to the new guy because he's going to be so much better because the grass is always greener on the other side. This is a delusion. This is a delusion. Some of you have maybe fallen into this before. I was just talking to a woman just a little while ago, maybe a couple days ago, who fell into this pit. She was like, yeah, my husband, I don't think we're in love anymore. And, I just don't think that I married the wrong guy, I'm pretty sure. And so she's, kind of looking at an old flame. So she reconnects with him. They go off together and she's thinking this is it. And then she realizes, he doesn't seem to take showers very often. And he kind of smells. And it was like a beautiful delusion. All of a sudden she's waking up well, he's got flaws too. I mean, the shower thing is kind of a serious flaw, if you ask me. And it's like, oh. So there aren't perfect men out there. They're all imperfect. The grass is not necessarily greener on the other side. Thank goodness she woke up. Maybe God made him smell on purpose. So that she would go the grass is not always greener on the other side, right? So that's one of them, that you've missed the boat, you missed your true soulmate, it's this other guy. If you just went off with the pastor or the neighbor guy or, your coworker, then it'd be so much better. Also, another little beautiful delusion, and it is quite beautiful, Satan will make it seem that pouring all of your energy into your kids and ignoring your husband is the best thing to do. I mean, it sounds kind of almost noble. Right? I'm just going to pour all my energy into my children. And my husband, he's an adult, he can take care of himself. And all of a sudden your marriage falls apart because you poured all of your energy and focus into your kids and left your husband kind of sitting on the wayside, right? And it seems like a pretty cool thing. Your kids, and you love your kids, and it seems very noble for a mom to put so much energy into it. But you see how it was a beautiful delusion to put 99% of your energy and focus into the kids and nothing into your marriage? Beautiful delusion. And here's one, a third common beautiful delusion. Satan will lead you to believe that your marriage should be just like the fairy tales or the romance novels or the romantic comedies, right? He'll make you believe you should be constantly in love with your husband. Is anyone in this room who's been married more than 2 years constantly in love with your husband, Twitter-pated, from the Bambi movie, Thumper was Twitter-pated, just constantly Twitter-pated, oh my gosh. I mean, no. I mean, raise your hand if you've been married more than 2 years and you're constantly in love with your husband. Come on, come on now. Don't be shy. Don't be shy, people. Yeah. So there you go, right? But I was talking to a wife a couple of weeks ago who is divorcing her husband for this very reason. She doesn't feel great love for him at this moment. She doesn't feel in love with him. I'm like, hello, that is normal. It's actually normal, people, not to feel constantly loved. It's kind of like this. It sort of ebbs and flows, and that is normal. And what happens is when you think that you're supposed to be constantly in love with him and then you're not, guess what? You get kind of resentful. you're disappointed, and then you're resentful, like, he's just not good enough for me. Like, I married the wrong man, right? So, do not fall into this very common trap that he's supposed to constantly make you happy, and you're just supposed to be Twitter-pated at all moments. If that's happening to you, then by golly, you should be writing a book about how this is happening, because no one else in the world has experienced this. This is very unique. But don't fall into that trap that you have to be constantly in love with him or you found the wrong guy. Number 4. Satan lies to us about our husband's worth and prompts us to keep a running inventory of his failures, flaws, our disappointments, frustrations, accusations, judgments against our husband, and that causes us to treat our husbands with disrespect and sometimes even disgust. Because, this I know, women are very efficient at note-taking. Right? Well, then he did this, and then he did that, and 10 years ago, I haven't forgotten that. Let me add that to my long list, my scroll that I can roll out of all the flaws and failures of my husband. Well, how is that going to work if that's what we're going to park on and dwell on, right? In Revelations 12:10, Satan is described as the accuser of the brethren. Does your husband feel like he's constantly accused? Like he's constantly criticized, judged, condemned? Are you 10 times more likely to point out what he did wrong than what he did right? Are you kind and forgiving and compassionate as Jesus is to you? Or are you an angry accuser and judger like the devil? I don't want to be a mini devil in anyone's life, right? Because that's what he does. He accuses, he condemns, he judges. I don't want to be a mini Satan in a marriage or in any relationship. I'd be like, do you want to be that? I don't think that's a good plan. I think we should avoid doing that. 5th, Satan lies to us about God's command for a wife to show respect to her husband, and he tells us we only need to do that when we feel respect for our husbands. That is not exactly what the Bible says. Ephesians 5:33, it says the wife must respect her husband. Does it say anything about feeling? I've learned this command means choosing to treat your husband with honor and respect. It is not a feeling. It's just showing honor, treating him with dignity, showing respect, whether or not he's disappointed you recently. Even if you're having to set a boundary, even if you're having a tough conversation with him saying, you've been drinking too much, or you're gaming 24/7 and you're not even working anymore, or whatever the thing is, you can still speak in a respectful tone without rolling your eyes, without pointing at him and treating him like he's 3 years old. You can still be respectful in terms of choosing the way that you're going to interact with him. Number 6, in terms of our dirty dozen lies, he lies to us by telling us we should dwell on the past mistakes or sins of our husbands, and as a result we develop toxic resentment against our husbands. Hebrews 12:15, see to it that no bitter root grows up among you to cause trouble and defile many. And again, when we dwell on everything wrong about our husbands, and they're going to have some imperfections, that's going to be the case, it's going to cause resentment. And if we let that just be what we park on, pretty soon your marriage is going to blow up because you're like, I married the wrong guy, I can't even stand this guy, my heart is now cold. So that's not a good plan. 7th of the dirty dozen lies, Satan lies to us by telling us our husband should meet all our needs for love and security instead of looking to the Lord to meet those deep emotional needs. And I think this is also from like the romantic movies and such, isn't it? Like, oh, I don't know why I'm singing, but oh, he will meet all your needs. He'll be perfect in every way. He'll love you tenderly, but he'll be a fierce warrior during the daytime. And he'll slay it in the marketplace, but then he'll come home and he'll tenderly woo you and bring you roses and sing to you apparently, and all these things. And you're like, and then you're like, oh, he's not doing that every moment. What? Because you were expecting that he was supposed to meet all of your deepest emotional needs, which he cannot do. There is no man. I had a pretty great husband. Raul was a pretty awesome husband. But even he was not perfect. He could not meet all of my emotional needs. I had to look to the Lord to be the one that was always going to be there, always going to be reliable, always going to be compassionate, always willing to listen to, tell him about my horrible day, and be willing to be compassionate and empathetic and not get tired of me rambling on and on. I mean, I had to trust the Lord to be that person. Your husband cannot be a perfect source of love and security, so don't put him in that position where you are putting all of that pressure on him. 2 Corinthians 11:13 says, but I am afraid that as the serpent deceived Eve by his craftiness, your minds will be led astray for the simplicity and purity of devotion to Christ. Isn't that kind of an interesting verse? We're supposed to have this simple devotion toward Christ. Like he is supposed to be our main guy. He's the main one. But then look at the serpent deceives. He's so crafty. He's like, ooh, marry this man and then expect him to be all of the things you need. It's like a subtle scheme of the enemy. That man cannot, no man can perfectly meet all your emotional needs. Only the Lord can. Here's another big old fat lie. He lies to us about the doom we will experience if we were to set boundaries when our husband is out of line or sinning against us. So we become too fearful to set boundaries at all. But God does not intend you and I to live in fear. 2 Timothy 1:7, for God gave us a spirit not of fear, but of power and love and self-control. The truth is, with God by your side as your source of strength, you can set boundaries. Even I was able to set boundaries with Raul, because occasionally he got kind of like irritable sometimes, and because he's Latino, and when he's irritable, his emotions are like big. And so he would get really loud and sometimes a little bit disrespectful to me in the process. And I, as a former conflict avoider, would have normally gone, oh, okay, I'll just go to another room and I won't say a word. And God showed me how to have the courage to set boundaries and actually say calmly and respectfully, I'm sorry, you're having a bad day, but you can't talk to me like that, so please don't ever do that again. And I was not just like that too. And you know what? It worked. I lived through the experience. So God can give you the courage to do that. And even if your husband doesn't respond well, because some of you are thinking, okay, yeah, but you don't know my husband. If I set boundaries, it's not going to end well. Well, first of all, if you're afraid of actual abuse, you need to go seek help. You might even need to remove yourself from the situation physically. But if you're just afraid of the blowback, because almost anyone, when you're setting boundaries, is going to push back a little bit. Just expect that. But if you're afraid that he's not going to respond well, cling to the verse that I just cling to continually. Hebrews 13:5. God will never leave you nor forsake you. That is such a precious verse to me. Is it precious to anybody else? I just love that verse. Because it's like, no matter what happens, even if he doesn't respond well, even if he gets super defensive or loud or whatever, or says, oh, and it says, I'm not going to do what you say, whatever. God is never going to leave my side. Isn't that just a precious truth? No matter what, God will stay by my side as I work my way through this. Our ninth lie of the dirty dozen lies. Satan lies by getting us to believe that it would be better to stuff our anger than work all the way through a disagreement until it's resolved. Anyone else ever fall into this pit? And this is like another trap for conflict avoiders especially. Anyone else? Okay, raise your hand. I just have to see if it's, usually it's 50-50. Okay, yeah, pretty much. So for the conflict avoiders in the room, the rest of you can just check out for this particular point. But for the conflict avoiders in the room, we tend to stuff things because it's like, oh, I don't know what to do. And so we stuff our anger instead of working all the way through a conflict. Ephesians 4:26 and 27 makes it clear that this is one of the enemy's methods to get a foothold. It says, in your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you are still angry. And do not give the devil a foothold. Do you see the linkage there? It's saying, like, if you procrastinate in solving the issue that's causing you to be angry, if you procrastinate and keep stuffing the situation, you're giving the devil a foothold in your life, in the relationship. This happens so easily, doesn't it? Some grievance occurs, we don't deal with it right away, we start to stew and simmer, and the resentment starts to slowly grow, and pretty soon you end up saying, like, I never should have married him, I knew it, right? I mean, so deal with the stuff and quickly. I don't necessarily deal with it before the sun literally goes down, but like within 24 hours or 48 hours, deal with it. And then I will just give one other sage bit of advice for all of you conflict avoiders. Even when you broach the subject, that's not like finishing it. You have to work all the way through it until you've actually resolved the situation. There you go. Okay, 10th lie. He lies to us by convincing us that the purpose of our marriage is to make us happy. That is the purpose. Well, that's probably why you got married. Because you're like, well, first of all, you wanted a diamond ring, And you wanted the wedding, and you wanted the dress, and all the things, and the makeup, and the hair, and a honeymoon, and, all the things, right? But you basically you thought, okay, this guy's going to make me happy. That's normal. That's not a crime. But that's not the ultimate purpose of your marriage. Actually, there's no such verse in the Bible that says about, get married so you can be happy. Has anyone found that verse? Because I'd really like to see it. But not in there. It doesn't say anything about getting married so you can be happy. Actually, what it does say is that the wife was created to help her husband and be his companion. Genesis 2:18. Then the Lord God said, it's not good for the man to be alone. I will make him a helper suitable for him. Yikes. I mean, it's like, okay, this is one of the purposes of marriage, apparently. But husbands also have some responsibilities here, too. Ephesians 5:25, God calls husbands to sacrifice their own desires to love their wife well. So that's good news for us, too. But it really isn't about our personal happiness. It's an opportunity to grow in character, because, boy, haven't some of you already grown in character in your marriage? But I mean, seriously, isn't it like this? It's like a petri dish, like God's doing stuff in his lab called this marriage thing, where you're like forging character and learning to persevere and learning how to be patient with other people's flaws. And, I mean, aren't you, if you allow God, he's growing your character in this marriage. So it's an opportunity, don't you love that word? It's an opportunity to grow in character. It's an opportunity to grow in maturity, so that we reflect Christ even on difficult days. Our 11th lie to expose. Satan lies to us by trying to get us to believe that we must keep our husbands happy and please them above everything else, which can lead to a very unbalanced relationship. Galatians 1:10, for am I now seeking the approval of man or of God? Or am I trying to please man? If I were still trying to please man, I would not be a servant of Christ. And sometimes we fall for this lie that I've got to keep my husband happy, that that's my job. I've got to keep him happy. And what happens then? You can exhaust yourself. You can overserve your husband, which leads them to believe the world revolves around them. You can disappear in the relationship entirely, where your needs and desires don't even matter anymore. When any of those things happen, guess what ultimately happens? You start to grow resentful again. And if you let resentment keep going, guess what happens? I should have never married this man. Divorce. Our 12th lie. Our 12th and final lie of the dirty dozen lies. Oh boy. I just talked to a woman a month ago. This happened to her. He lies to us by whispering that it's harmless for you to reconnect with an old flame or to have a close male friend other than your husband. It's harmless. It's harmless. It's harmless. You have good intentions, and you probably do. It might seem harmless, but when you give into this temptation, you are on such a slippery slope. This verse came to mind, James 1, starting in verse 14. But each person is tempted when they are dragged away by their own evil desire and enticed. Then after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is full grown, gives birth to death. It's like a slippery slope. Do you see it in that verse? Like the slippery slope. And I'm just telling you, I have talked about this thing of reconnecting with an old flame so many times at SOS. The particular woman I was talking to about a month ago about it, she even told me, yeah, I've heard you talk about that so many times. I just didn't think it applied to me. And so she reconnected. Because she thought it was, guess what? Harmless. Guess what? It wasn't harmless when her husband read the text back and forth between her and the old flame and went, what is happening here? Right? Like, it was not harmless because it was like a slow reeling in by the devil where she started to connect and go like, he was such a great guy. I wonder how I could be of help to him and maybe even pray for him, because that sounds pretty holy and spiritual and pure. And maybe I could be of a help to him. But you see how Satan then starts reeling it in. Pretty soon she's waiting for the phone call. A little giddy, maybe even a little Twitter-pated, right? Because it's like, ooh, that like kind of that fun, and maybe even the forbidden fruit fun, and pretty forbidden fruit fun, easy for me to say. But after a couple months, she's like rendezvousing with this guy, right? And she's like, how did I end up here? You told me about this. Yes, I did. And now I'm telling you all again. And don't be surprised, because the enemy's going to try to work this scheme, even though you just heard it again. And I just told you, be aware. And the enemy's like, I'll see if they were really listening. You better be listening. Did you hear what I said? It's not harmless. Okay, so we're going to move quickly to how to overcome the devil's plans to destroy your marriage or your someday marriage. Some of you aren't married right now, but this is good ammunition to knock out the enemy's plans later in your life. The number one biggest strategy is to actually apply God's instruction in 1 Peter 5, 8, and 9 to be alert to Satan's schemes. Hello, like just what I said. Like I've told the people at SOS, the women at SOS, year after year after year, don't reconnect with an old flame. Don't reconnect with an old flame. I'm like, oh, is she talking to me? Yes! So be alert to the enemy's schemes. Everything we just talked about, all 12 of those dirty dozen lies, he will try to launch them against you. Yes, you. He will try to do it. I can almost guarantee you have a bullseye in your back. He's like, yes, I'm going to try that. So be alert to his schemes. Let me read the verse. It says, be alert and of sober mind. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. Resist him, standing firm in the faith. And there are two key parts to this admonition from God. The first is that we do need to be alert to his schemes instead of being all laid back and lackadaisical. My marriage will be just fine. If you're a believer, you do have a bullseye on your back, on your marriage. He's already been scheming how to take down your marriage. Do you know that? He's already been scheming. He might have already started a plot already. So be alert. Don't say, oh, this will never happen to us. In fact, let's just pause for a second. Look back at those dirty dozen 12 lies. Where is the enemy already trying to get an inroad? Can you see any place where he's already tried something maybe? Where do you sense he might be trying to get a foothold now? Just take a look. Where is he trying to weasel in? Just take a look at that. I'm going to give you a couple of seconds to just peek at your dirty dozen lies. Okay, hopefully you saw something there. Well, not that I'm hoping the enemy is doing something in your marriage, but he probably is trying to find an inroad. But let's look also at another part of that admonition in 1 Peter 5. God tells us to do something active in fighting against the enemy's schemes. He says we must resist his schemes. This means when you recognize a scheme of the enemy being hatched against you, you immediately tell a trusted, godly friend or counselor about it, and you take all the action necessary to resist falling prey to his schemes. Ephesians 5:11 says, take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather expose them. Expose his schemes immediately. Well, you often need accountability in order to really resist the devil's dark schemes. Proverbs 28:13 says, whoever conceals their sins does not prosper, but the one who confesses and renounces them finds mercy. So I'm just telling you, a major way to resist falling into his schemes is when you see him trying to get a foothold with any one of these lies. When you see the devil trying to get a foothold, you immediately tell me, another leader at SOS, a trusted godly friend, a counselor, you immediately say, I see he's up to this. Because the minute you drag it into the light, it's like it breaks the hold of the devil when it's exposed to the light. Plus you have accountability. Plus I get to ask you, so have you seen that guy again? Or, so have you actually worked at resolving that conflict, or are you still simmering with resentment? I get to be, or whoever you have trusted this with, gets to hold you accountable, which is a good thing, which is a really good thing. Because now the enemy cannot get a foothold. Okay, second idea here, gear up for spiritual warfare against the enemy by spending time in God's Word every day, as well as praying every day for your husband and your marriage. I know this probably seems like elementary to say that, but come on, let's pray every day for your husband or future husband and your marriage. These are really effective tools for battling the enemy. You can read about it in Ephesians 6, where it talks about the spiritual warfare and the armor that you're supposed to put on, like praying and reading your Bible. Thirdly, purposely pause every time a negative, judgmental, accusatory thought comes into your head about your husband, and ask God to give you his perspective on that situation. Ask God to give you his perspective on the situation. In other words, go to God in listening prayer. Like, tell me what's going on, God. I don't get what's happening right now. I feel like my husband has been letting me down right and left, or I'm so disappointed about this, but Lord, can you give me your perspective on this situation? It's God's desire for us to know truth. Did you know that? He desires us to know the truth. Psalm 51:6 says, surely you desire truth at the inner parts. You teach me wisdom in the inmost place. And referring to the Holy Spirit that would soon be coming to the disciples, Jesus says in John 16:13, but when he, the Spirit of truth, comes, he will guide you into all truth. So pause. When you have those kind of ugly thoughts going on in your head about your husband, or disappointments or frustrations, Lord, can you just give me your perspective on what's going on? When I remember to do that in my marriage to Raul, when I was really frustrated with him, when I would remember to do that, I can't say that I always did, but when I did remember to pause and ask the Lord, like, can you give me your perspective on what's happening? He was always so good to just help me to see things, like, from an objective viewpoint, like what could be going on here. It was super, super helpful. Also, ask another mature, godly woman or counselor for wisdom regarding your situation. Share some of your thinking with them. Ask for their perspective. You will often find that someone outside your situation can see it so much more clearly than you can. Proverbs 15:10 says, wisdom is found in those who take advice. I have a couple of people in my life that I will bounce things off of. I did it just yesterday, and a woman that I'm kind of partnering with this, she called me today for some advice. It's like sometimes you just need to have that objective person, if you're upset with your husband or whatever the situation is, and go like, okay, this is what's happening. Am I being too emotional about this? Can you help me just look at this objectively? And it can be super helpful. Also, take every thought captive, especially every hypercritical thought. This means deciding not to dwell on negative judgmental thoughts. Again, we're commanded to take control of our thought life. 2 Corinthians 10:5, we demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. So take control of your thoughts. When super negative thoughts come into your mind, you get to take charge of those thoughts. You can start to purposely focus on your husband's good qualities instead. Some of you know, because I've told you before, that I often had to do this with Raul because I would start that negative list thing going in my head, and then there's this and this and this and this and this, and pretty soon I'm like, I should have never married him, and how you can go, and I'm sure I'm the only one that's ever done that kind of thing. But maybe a couple of you have experienced that, where you start to do the negative listing, and I would have to catch myself and say, no, I am going to start listing his good qualities, because every guy has some good qualities. And I'd start listing some of his good qualities, and in 10 seconds, my heart is changing toward him. I'm like, oh yeah, that's pretty good. Well, I guess I'm blessed to have that. Well, okay, I'm pretty happy that I married this guy. It's like so ridiculously simple, but it's like changing on purpose the trajectory of your thinking. Philippians 4:8, very familiar to many of you, but let me just read it again. Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. And your husband does have some praiseworthy things that you could dwell on. Number 6, dwell on God's promises of love and refuge during challenging times in your marriage, which reminds your soul that God can and will stay by your side and carry you through difficult seasons. Remember that Hebrews 13:5, I will never leave you nor forsake you. And I've loved for many years now Isaiah 41:10. It's just another precious promise. God says, so do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. 7, decide that from now on you will resolve conflict quickly, so that anger and resentment do not have a chance to grow. Remember that verse in Ephesians 4? In your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you are still angry, and do not give the devil a foothold. So let's make a commitment tonight that you're actually going to respectfully discuss and work through issues with your husband instead of ignoring them or self-medicating and just checking out and going shopping, overeating, overdrinking, whatever, so you don't have to deal with the issue. Because does that really work well for anybody? Probably not. A couple more thoughts. Decide to courageously set boundaries with your husband if he's sinning against you. Trusting God's promise that he will never leave your side, and trusting that you can rely on his strength and provision as you work through these tough situations with your husband. Joshua 1:9, have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. I love that he says, have I not commanded you? Do it. All right already. Be strong. Don't be a wimp. Be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened. Do not be dismayed. For the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. It's like he's commanding us to be strong, not because we are in ourselves, but because he's with us. We can be strong and courageous. Number 9, determine to look to God to meet your deepest emotional needs. For love, security, significance, instead of expecting your husband to meet those needs. God's love is alone perfect. He'll never stop loving you, ever. He will be constantly in love with you. Jeremiah 31:3, I have loved you with an everlasting love. And then the 10th and final insight, we must remind ourselves that God desires balance in our relationships, including marriage. He desires mutual encouragement, mutual submission, considering each other's interests. So spend time meditating on these last 3 scriptures if you need a little more balance in your relationship. Because again, if you let it be unbalanced, you will grow resentful. And guess what happens when we grow resentful? Are you all getting the picture now? We end up divorcing them, saying, I married the wrong guy. So if you feel like your marriage is out of balance, meditate on these 3 scriptures that might help you to bring balance back. Romans 14:18, let us pursue what makes for peace and for mutual upbuilding. Ephesians 5:21, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. And Philippians 2:4, let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also to the interests of others. In other words, your marriage is supposed to be balanced. It isn't all about him. It isn't all about you. It's about mutual submission, mutual encouragement, considering each other's interests. Well, we covered a lot of territory, but we expose the devil's dirty, rotten schemes. So now you're alert, right? Be alert.